Hello there, you're watching AMN English. This is our weekly program, Diplomatic Corner. Today I brought to you Dr. Melanie Porter. She's taught English for years. We will talk about African education and its challenges. We will also talk about Ethiopia and Addis Ababa. Stay with us. Well, Doctor, welcome to the program. I really appreciate your time, and I again thank you for coming here. Would you mind first just telling us a little about yourself?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the honor and the privilege of being able to speak to you and your audience. So thank you for that. So as you said, I was the English language fellow. I worked with the U.S. State Department. Coming to Ethiopia, I was a member of a cohort of fellows around the world, and we are connecting with local institutions, universities, education institutions to promote English language proficiency. And so trainings for teachers and staff and instructors to better inform practice ways and practices to teach English better, but also to provide resources, but then also the ability to teach classes. So students have an ability and an audience with a native speaker. I enjoyed that privilege in Bahadar, being able to teach classes, particularly with students who may never have met a native English speaker. And so I understand that in Ethiopia, while English is the medium of instruction after, in some regions, fifth grade, in some regions, seventh grade, often it is English with by Amharic. Um, which is not a bad way to teach English, but it may not be the most efficient way to teach English, particularly when the teachers themselves, the instructors themselves, may not have had continuous training in the language. And that's where a lot of dialogue and conversation during my tenure there stemmed around training and providing resources and trainings for the teachers and instructors so that their English improves, so that their teaching improves.
So, Doctor, you were here in Ethiopia for some time. So, would you tell us about Ethiopia? I mean, the people, the culture, and what is your feeling about Ethiopia and Ethiopians in general?
Ethiopia, not just the borders itself, but what we know historically of Ethiopia that included a much larger region, right? It encapsulates so much history. I enjoyed my stay. I enjoyed being with the Amharic people and the Gamo Zone people, and two very different cultures, but I enjoyed my stay. I enjoyed being able to be immersed in these local cultures, being able to learn a little Amharic so that I can, again, live daily life. Um, I I had never visited Ethiopia before. I had been to other African countries, but Ethiopia being the the heart of civilization as a whole brought it just a very different feeling. And so I really enjoyed my stay there. I found the Ethiopian people to be very welcoming. I enjoyed some of the food of Ethiopia. I am not necessarily a fan of injera. And so while that is a big staple around the country, I I found it to be very sour. And so I have a very delicate palate, but on the whole, I enjoyed being able to just be able to know that everything I ate, whether all the fruits and vegetables that I was able to enjoy. I loved that knowing that they were clean and organic, which is very different than in the US. Often it is very hard in the US to find good, clean, organic food that is reasonably priced. And so I enjoy being in Ethiopia because I felt very healthy. I felt very strong. I don't drink alcohol. And so I did not partake in tej or the honey wine. And then there was another, I don't know its name, but from the Dorze people, um, their drink was very, very strong, even just to the smell when they opened the jar. So I don't drink at all, but I enjoyed being with the Ethiopian people.
Well, Doctor, you stayed a little in the capital, Addis Ababa here. So would you tell us something about Addis Ababa?
Addis Ababa is a beautiful city. It's a nice place. Um, it's undergone a makeover of sorts recently. Uh, and there was so much going on there. If when the world comes to Ethiopia and they come to Addis does a great job of presenting Ethiopia. It has infrastructure, it has a variety of restaurants and theater and cultural houses. It represents Ethiopia well. But I'm glad that I got to spend the majority of my time in other places. I think when visitors come, they should visit Addis. They should visit Addis Ababa. They should visit the Unity Park, which is wonderful. They should visit Intoto Park. They should visit Lucy. They should, but they also should visit some of the other places. They should go to Gabon. They should go to the Simeon Mountains. They should go down to the Gamo Zone. And go see the waterfalls at Tisabai. There is a need to see other places. Come visit Dorze houses. They need to see all of Ethiopia. Go visit the Gabela area. Go up to Mekelle and even visit the active volcanoes. Like there is so much more to the country than just Addis.
Talking about African education, so how is education like in Africa? I mean, in your view?
I don't know that it's fair to encapsulate all of Africa, the entire continent, to one thought, because every country, 54 nations in the continent, and within each country, they have so many other ethnicities and ways of life. So I don't think it's a good idea or even a very smart idea to lump the entire continent to one particular pervasive thought. I think that because all of the countries are not equalized. Some countries are more advanced, some countries are still developing. And so I would not join into the discussion to say all of Africa is whatever that blank line is. What I would be able to say is I would be able to join into the conversation on what I observed in the parts of Ethiopia that I was in. I was able to do a little bit of traveling in the Amhara region. So while I served at Baradar University, but I also was able to go to Dabark and to Gondar and to Injibata. And so there are different approaches to education um, from the primary level, secondary, and then tertiary. Ethiopia's approach to education, I that I can speak to and observe. I don't think it would be fair to talk about all of Africa or even to compare Ethiopia perhaps to other African nations. For instance, I would not compare the whole of Africa to the whole of Nigeria. I don't think that's a fair comparison. And while education as a whole needs to be talked about, but it definitely needs to talk about in stages. I will challenge where is to spend a lot more time developing the teachers and instructors in primary school where they lack resources, they need resources. Like if we're going to build the educational structure within Ethiopia, it must start at the foundation. And so, if I talk about how to move education forward in Ethiopia, we want to start at the foundational level. We want to empower the primary school teachers. We want to give them resources and access to development and curriculum to move them forward so that they're teaching better, they're teaching more equipped, and we're developing and building better students that will continue to move forward on through secondary education as well as through tertiary education. I worked primarily at the university, and its reach back went to the high school teachers. But I think we have to reach back even further, because if we're trying to adjust change in students at the university level, that's often too late. They're getting ready to join into the workforces. They're getting ready to have families. They're getting ready to join into the upper echelons of moving into society. But if we want even their language to improve, we can't start at the end of the line. We must start at the beginning.
The ability to provide children and the youth with the opportunities to contribute to the development of their country uh, just determines the future of the society, the future of the country. So this is also achieved through education. So what does Africa needs in terms of this?
I agree with you that every nation has to spend its time developing education as a whole. And you are correct that if we um, move Africa as a whole forward to compete with the rest of the world, it will change the trajectory of the world. Africa as a continent, um, I would love to see it in my lifetime, a united Africa. And I would love to participate in making it a reality, that if Africa united would develop strategies to move all of its education systems forward so that they can compete. And so when we talk about providing for our children and the youth, education outlets need to create avenues where students are not just stuck in the classroom as if that's the only place where learning happens. So in the West, we devote a lot of time to service learning and project-based learning. And that is an area of training that I try to bring into the Ethiopian curriculum. Project-based learning, service learning allows students the opportunity to develop their critical thinking skills that they are going to need in the workplace. Often I was stuck in conversations with my colleagues that learning seemed to only take place in the classroom. And once the students left the classroom, they left the idea that learning was still a possibility, including language development. But that's not so. Every place that they go, there is learning opportunities happening all around. And so providing opportunities for service learning, where there is a critical need to be met, that students can actively participate in finding and developing solutions, strategies for development, sustainable development in every area, whether it just be agricultural or whether it be textile industry, whatever those industries are where students are excited about. We have to empower students to develop their passions, develop their critical thinking skills so that they find solutions, very tangible, very real, life solutions, even outside of the classroom. This connection of academics and real world experiences will teach, engage, and empower students in ways that solely relying on textbooks that they cannot. If we invite students and schools to be innovative with these ways, it will utilize scarce resources, particularly human resources, um, in particularly in areas where technology may be limited. What are the creative outlets that these young people have that they can then implement, engage, and strategize? That's where we can build the bridge between what the government is providing as far as education resources and what the community can engage and what the students themselves can engage. Governments need to prioritize that equity of resources for young people to be able to engage themselves academically. these young people won't stay young forever. And so, if we develop their critical thinking skills, if we develop their social skills, their emotional intelligence, we will invoke a better student that will be prepared to enter into the global market and global conversations going on. And they won't feel left out of first world or Western world ideologies and marketplaces. They will be able to compete because they're not only their language has developed, but their skill sets have developed.
Well, Doctor, some say that the Western standards still continue to dominate African education. There are universities which still instruct using the curriculums with almost just no connection to life in Africa. So it is an imperative to say that African education curriculums that incorporates African perspective, histories, cultures, and knowledge is vital. So what is your take on this?
I agree that African nations should have African perspectives in the curriculum. So that is a conversation that still happens here in the West as well. For instance, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is a major city in the state of New York. But often the textbooks did not reflect the lives of inner city youth. So sometimes the examples that would be read, the stories that would be read, would be out of context for a student that was raised in an inner city. They had very rural ideologies. So things talking about farming, talking about the lifestyle of rural America that is a complete disconnect from inner city students or students that live in the country versus students that live on a coastal region. So textbooks, curriculum has to be able to include the realities of the students that it will provide education for. That audience needs to be reflective. And so one of the things that is happening in the West is that there are multiple options for schools to choose different curriculums. And I think that that's one tool that Africa can take away from is that Africa can then develop and design its own curriculum that would be reflective of the population and the audiences that it serves. The benefit of having options to choose from is that educational systems can choose that it's not one perspective, and that is very reminiscent of the colonial tentacles that still lay on the continent. That Africa as a whole has to be able to release itself from the stench of the colonial impartation that dominates its thought process. Educational material should be reflective of the indigenous knowledge and power that has caused Africa to be Africa. It's interesting to me that the cradle of civilization, the cradle of what we know as thoughts, knowledge, and power all began on the African continent. It wasn't always called Africa. However, we as humankind began at the motherland. And so that when Africa begins to embrace its actual power, it can overturn the crippling effects of what colonization did, not only to Africa, but even what it has done abroad, particularly like in the US. All of Africa can can do this, but I do think that there is a strategy in uniting Africa in order to get that done. It would still be disjointed if every nation kind of did it itself. But there needs to be a collective power that united Africa comes together to say that let's return to our origins so that the world can see that our indigenous knowledge has not depleted. It actually is stronger when we are together. Uniting Africa, it will impact every area of African life. It will impact its education. It will impact its its financial capacities. It will impact every area of development. But what has happened is the dismantling of a united Africa, the dismantling of what through colonization, that dismantling still is reminiscent right now. And as long as Africa is disjointed and disconnected, colonization wins, and it will forever be stripped of all of its resources, not only natural resources, but human resources. And so Africa needs that connectiveness in order to empower every area of life to not only stabilize it, but move it forward.
Low English proficiency, and it's a barrier, I think, in some African countries just to compete globally in various fields. With regard to these regional and local English associations, I think play a great role. However, students have far less than the expected skills in the language even after they graduate. So what do you think the reason behind this?
I experienced that in Ethiopia. And one of the challenges that I faced is trying, and it was my approach to that deficiency. My approach is getting people to understand that the foreign language of English in Ethiopia or other African nations, particularly in Ethiopia, though, there is a need for perfection that I battled against. And so my approach was to try to chip away at the need for perfection and that cultural burden it places upon the individual, students, teachers, instructors, everyone. English is relegated in the classroom only. Students and teachers, instructors did not use the language outside of the classroom. And that is one of the barriers where proficiency won't evolve if we leave it in the classroom. And so every day I'm encouraging students, don't worry about grammatic perfect proficiency. Just speak. Just speak. And so being able to relieve the pressure of that cultural burden that it had to be perfect. So in my audience, there was not the ridicule that they said that they would receive in other places.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much again for your time and for your reflections just on the African education. I really thank you for your perspectives here on behalf of our program, behalf of Addis Media Network. I hope we would meet again some other days.
Thank you so very much for having me, and I hope we can do it again.
All right. Well, everyone, that's it for now from Addis Media Network English. This was a Diplomatic Corner program. I was with Dr. Melanie Porter, an English fellow. Until I meet you with another guest next week, have a wonderful time.